It started with the feeling that the ceiling was closer than it should be, not dramatically, not so much that it was immediately noticeable, but subtly, imperceptibly at first, like a trick of perception, the kind that comes with waking in darkness before the eyes have adjusted, when the brain fills in what the shadows conceal. He would open his eyes in the stillness of night, the room faint with ambient silence, and something about the air above him felt heavier, like the space had shrunk. Slightly, not enough to provoke alarm, only enough to make him stay still for a moment longer than usual, as if movement might confirm a suspicion he couldn't yet name. At first, he told himself it was imagination, that the shadows were playing tricks, that the absence of light distorted depth, made flat surfaces loom, made distant corners feel immediate. But night after night, the impression grew sharper. Not every night, not predictably, but often enough to plant doubt. He began waking not with thoughts or dreams, but with awareness, a kind of quiet alertness that focused entirely on the space above his bed, the square of ceiling that should have felt benign, forgotten, but now seemed to exert a pressure, subtle yet specific, like being watched by something without eyes. He tested it, of course. During the day, he measured the ceiling, from floor to plaster, from wall to wall. Everything checked out. The room was unchanged. But at night, in the thick dark where outlines soften and memory becomes uncertain, the ceiling felt lower, just enough to set his breath slightly shallow, just enough to make turning onto his back feel exposed. He found himself sleeping on his side more often, not consciously avoiding the overhead space, but unconsciously leaning away from it, as though something was there that preferred stillness. He told no one. There was nothing to tell. He wasn't afraid, not exactly. The feeling wasn't threatening, not yet, but it was persistent. And persistence, he knew, was a kind of presence. Then came the night when he reached upward without thinking, some half-waking gesture, a stretch, a habit, and his fingers stopped sooner than they should have, brushing against what felt like the edge of cold air, like a denser patch of atmosphere, just above his hand, and he pulled back instinctively, heart tightening not from contact but from proximity, because suddenly he was sure, the ceiling wasn't where it had always been. He stopped reaching upward after that night, not out of fear of what he might touch, but from the deeper discomfort of almost having touched something that shouldn't have been there, something that might not have been surface at all, but a threshold, a limit, a membrane between the room he knew and something else that pressed down in silence, not moving fast enough to be seen, only fast enough to be felt, like a pressure drop before a storm, Except the storm never came and the pressure never lifted. Every night became an exercise in stillness, not because he was afraid to move, but because movement felt acknowledged, as though each shift of his body beneath the covers was registered above him, not in sight or sound, but in proximity, like the space between him and the ceiling had taken on a density too exact to be natural. The measurements he'd taken in daylight no longer reassured him. The numbers hadn't changed, but the air had. It felt wrong, compressed in a way he couldn't explain, as though the room had been carefully condensed, not from the floor up, but from the ceiling down, not enough to leave visible signs, not enough to crack the walls or warp the corners, but enough to change how his chest rose when he breathed, how his eyes adjusted in the dark, how his thoughts grew smaller, quieter, as if the ceiling was muffling not just sound, but awareness. He began sleeping with the light on, a dull amber bulb in the far corner that never flickered, never cast dramatic shadows, just a constant haze of presence, a line of resistance between him and the invisible descent above. For a few nights, it helped. The room felt open again, the ceiling stable, the air lighter. But light, he learned, didn't stop the feeling. It only highlighted the ceiling's stillness, which now seemed not natural but deliberate, like it was waiting for him to forget about it long enough to resume whatever slow motion it had started. And then came the dream.